So I would like to talk about a certain complication of simple truths which guide us today and are in the way for us to answer certain questions. These two persons are just to start up our conversation. I don't want to deliver a lecture on John Locke or on John Stuart Mill, because, of course, you may find a lecture on YouTube on Locke and Andrei Zakharov's lecture on GOPS, and a brief mix of these two lectures, jumping from these two authors who are recognized as founding fathers of liberalism. But there are other authors as well. But there are two treatises about management or about governance and form of governance. There are two texts which are translated into Russian, and you may read them. And you can order them through Ozon, which is an internet shop. This is not an advertisement, by the way. But I have to mention several other authors, like Aristotle, who introduced the notion of politics and who distinguished between different forms of governance, including democracy, and we have lots of stereotypes based on that. And of course, Machiavelli should be mentioned. Machiavelli's a lecture on Machiavelli is also in YouTube, delivered by Andrei Zakharov. Machiavelli was the guy who introduced the notion of republic as a mix of different forms of governance. It's Locke, Hobbes, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Kant, and John Stuart Mill, of course, who came a little bit later. And there are most influential English thinkers of the 19th century. One of them said that there are many of those who are the first. But, of course, you cannot imagine many things without these authors. These are simple truths for us to discuss. That's what represents today something which is obvious, which goes without saying. Democracy is the power of people, and that's why it's impossible. We know that from the school years. You cannot argue with the majority. That's one of the truths which is often repeated by our first persons, because the majority is always right. There is no equality because all people are different. And the Russian liberals like to use this thesis, but in brackets it says that we do not want to be equal with others because we are smarter than others. And we are offended by the idea of being equal to everybody else. Individualism of the West doesn't provide for public good and public justice. Freedom and progress is incompatible with order. You want democracy, you want order. It's either or. It's either or. And that's what the Russian people face today, and not only today. And that's another dilemma which I would like to test today. Okay, you may limit your own freedom for the sake of your personal safety. Russians lost their freedom for their safety. They exchanged it. And this is a commonplace for Russian journalists. That's what they say in Russia today. Now, the final one, democracy is not needed to those who have a special way. In Polity, there is an article of 2009 published by Maxim Momot, who said that liberals betrayed their foundations because they said no to the approach that democracy is not for everybody. There are people who are not fit for democracy. Okay, so if you come to talk show, to political debates, if you open a newspaper, if you start writing a column, this is in your head already. So let us go through all these items today and let us test the authors which I mentioned. Of course, many people wrote about it next of them, but they were the first. Okay, let us start from democracy. This caricature of Bidstrup in a Danish newspaper, Social Democrat, it was made not far from here. It presents our Soviet notions about the power of people. Democracy is the power of people. We are accustomed to this philological treatment of democracy on the basis of the wording of this, the way it was said. Democracy is the power of people. But here comes several reasons which end the dialogue about democracy pretty quickly. If we talk about it along these lines, well, when we talk about people, we think that the power belongs to the people. What about subordination? What about authority? Who are subordinate to the people? One subject cannot be subordinate to itself and be at the top of itself. Subordination is a special process. You either subordinate or you subordinate. You can do both. Aristotle used to say that it's good when you know how to be at the top and how to be subordinate. This is actually typical for middle class, but it's kind of a blind alley. You say, so what? We are the people. So what? And then the people govern. How? How they do it? Well, there are two more theses. Because the people cannot be taken as something indivisible. It is not a billiard ball. The people consist of numerous groups which include individuals, and the number of this group is innumerable, depending on the situation which you belong at this particular moment, and on the number of roles which you play at this particular moment. Dictatorship of the poorest, straight dictatorship of proletariat, the way it was understood by the Soviet classics of the political science, inevitably, in a short while, brings about tyranny, or maybe oligarchy and tyranny, or oligarchy turns into tyranny, because the popular masses, they are not fools, but since they are not subject, they are easily manipulated by demagogues who operate in the interests which have nothing to do with the benefit of this group. They use their own interests, and that, well, we may put an end to the talk about democracy. If we consider democracy as a power of people, if it's exclusively so, but there were several things more to specify this notion. If you don't do it, that would be it, and we are lost. in 3 steps. This is a mate in 3 steps, 3 moves. And the response to it, well, comes from the books, which we presumably read. But it actually, the Soviet power taught us that you have to read Marx and Lenin. The rest goes to the Museum of History of Political Thought. Aristotle is a good guy, a good philosopher. He was a right philosopher, but you shouldn't read him. So I think you should, by the way, check on what I am saying. But Aristotle specifies 5 types of democracy. He doesn't distinguish between right or wrong forms of government. Russian language plays, well, kind of a joke with us sometimes. A deviating model is monarchy, because deviation takes place in the head of one person, and here comes tyranny. Democracy is also easily movable, and it's governance of broad, poor, straight. And Aristotle said that this is the worst possible form of governance. Russian intellectuals at the beginning of the 20th century didn't speak about it. Those who called themselves Russian philosophers and minds, somehow they didn't put forward this simple thesis when the most cruel tyranny was set, and bloody tyranny was set in our country, and we still pay for it. Aristotle already said that democracy may be based not on the government of the poor minority, but on the law, which is above the opinion of the majority. I have already mentioned Machiavelli, who actually cuts this argument short. You take a decision. Do you need agreement of the majority? Can this decision be implemented without support of the people? Probably the answer is no. Probably the answer is no. Do you need legitimacy through the will of people? Yeah, well, this is an absolute demand for modern times. Can you develop a solution? For instance, in Facebook there is a quote from Kolchak who says that the crowd is foolish and the best decisions are taken by one person. This is disbalance again. The crowd is foolish. I am the one to take decision for the crowd. Well, we don't try to find a balance. This is a specificity of our thinking. It has nothing to do with the civilization.
However, on the other hand, it is sometimes more prudent to accept laws and to make decisions in a more of a narrow circle. Otherwise, the decisions will simply not be taken. And then it is the rule of the few. Finally, if you have to fulfill some decision or make it, carry it out, then are you not acting on your own? And does democracy preclude such situations from happening? Of course not. So this means that elements of monarchy, elements of aristocracy, elements of democracy may coexist within one political arrangement. This also depends on the tasks which are to be resolved at this time, because it is clear that not everybody, not all people can assume the responsibility for carrying out a certain decision. it appears that most projects, most tasks are products of individual will, or at least the will of a few people. This is normal. This is just quite a trite theory of governance. So then why are we staying at that same level of the collegiate governance? We should not forget that in most cases the decisions are taken and carried out by individuals. Finally, we cannot help missing the circumstance that, as a matter of fact, and that's an important requirement of Locke, that no authority, no government may assume responsibility or the power higher than the power of those who are the electorate, because every person only has the rights limited by the law. So we cannot delegate to the government the right to manage our lives. We cannot give more than we have. This is formal logic coming from Aristotle. So the government cannot be higher than the actual authority vested with the totality of people who have instituted this government. We shall talk about this later when considering representative democracy, because the representative democracy is coming out of this statement. And here we have at least two viewpoints which have been formulated, and I think they're very important to us today. One is the dual. Well, first of all, there is a differentiation between the mode of government and the form of government. Because by the form of government, Saudi Arabia and Sweden are the same. They're monarchies. Just as much as North Korea and the United States, by the form, are identical, but by the mode of government are quite different. And in this sense, Sweden and the United Kingdom have a lot more in common with the United States, or with Bundesrepublik, or with Saudi Arabia or North Korea. So we know that any unitarian state may well be freer in terms of the degree of freedom than a federalist state. So indeed, in this sense, equality before the law, and we should remember that Kant spoke about the division of powers as the premise for democracy. But eventually, John Stuart Mill speaks about the representative democracy, to say that we cannot abolish the perception of democracy as the power of people. I would not like you to think that I'm trying to negate the component of people's power in democracy. I just wanted to say that it is not only the power of people. I just wanted to say that one should not reduce a democracy because it may lead us to a logical dead end and may preclude us from standing up and upholding these values. The power is vested with the people insofar as that people, through elected representatives, may control the state and to articulate
собственные требования,
its
чаяния идей.
own
При
requirements
том, что эти
and
требования, чаяния идей никогда не будут
his or her
едиными.
own requirements or demands.
Никогда
With
нельзя
that said,
сказать, это самое отвратительное, что может быть сказано,
these
народ
demands and
решил.
requirements are very
По
different
крайней мере,
because
по-русски это очень опасно.
the Russian or the
Народ
Latin
решил, что
statement
советская
as the
власть
people
будет,
has
и советская
decided
власть в
is
73
the
года
most
была.
dangerous,
И больше
indeed
народ никто
an
не спрашивает, чего
abominable
он
thing
хочет.
to say, because when the Russian people,
народ
so to say,
каким-то отдельным,
declared
дальше,
the
если
Soviet
вдруг
power,
народ был не согласен,
what ensued was one of the bloodiest nightmares in human history. And so indeed, operating with the vox populi concept is one of the most dangerous things in history.
Очевидно, что выбор не
Clearly,
делается
that
никогда, раз и
choice
навсегда.
is never done forever.
У того же Милля, я сейчас не буду останавливаться на этом подробно, существует
Mill
ясный, хотя
has
и
a very
совершенно
clear
неабсолютное рассуждение о том,
and
как
interesting
часто нужно
deliberation as to how often should the elections
Сейчас
take
не
place.
важно,
Now,
важен срок.
it is not really important how often they took place, even though John Stuart Mill was the one to talk among the first for the period not to be too short, like 1 year in the Roman Republic, because we know that the lame duck period is the last year in power, but it should neither be too long. So John Mill speaks about it. So John Stuart Mill spoke about 6 years, but that is not material. What is important is the periodical nature of these elections and the mandatory periodicity, and this entails that every person may participate in these elections as a representative, which is, of course, not a new idea to Mill, because Machiavelli says that any person in office, in high office, must be prepared to take a lower office. But any person who is not vested with any authority may also be prepared to take up the duties of an office. So it is for John Mill a responsibility. A right and not a responsibility, unlike participation in the jury, which is a responsibility and not a right. So this is a caricature from the famous gravure, Gary Locke. I think this is an interesting the artist chose a nickname, Locke, but we are often hearing the concept of the overwhelming majority or majority. The overwhelming majority, which first is an indispensable part of democracy. If it's the majority, then it's democratic, we're told. And if there is no majority, then you don't have the right to make your point. The 14% who are not in agreement with the policies of the government today do not exist for us. Well, we don't see them. What is 14% when there is 86%? Well, 14% is 20 million people for Russia. But who cares? You don't want it? All right, then we won't listen to you. Well, first of all, have you ever met or heard of a ruler, any ruler in human history, who would be prepared to say that I don't care about the majority? I hate the majority. The majority are fools and ignoramuses. I am the one who knows what is best. Do you think that a ruler would stay enthroned for long? Well, we know from the history textbooks that a ruler who was overthrown did not enjoy the support of the majority. But when do we learn about it? We only learn about it when the person has been dethroned. But up until he or she has been dethroned, we are not in a position to judge if that person enjoyed the wide popular support. And the reason why I'm quoting John Locke is that there is, of course, some irony in it. He wrote 2 treatises, and the second has some specific ideas as to how a just society may be structured, and he started writing about it some 10 years before the Glorious Revolution. Not all biographers believe that an achievement that John Locke wrote these 2 treatises not post factum but ante factum, more like a political program, which was eventually materialized during the 1688 revolution, the Glorious Revolution. And the words of James I, who was, of course, not a great proponent of absolute monarchy, but he was not a Democrat, and his conflicts with the parliament always led to some trouble. So this is a quotation from one of his appeals to the parliament. Any politician simply cannot help appealing or operating with the notions of the public good. Today, and this is most interesting, does this majority exist, really? Please try to read this quotation from Kant. Well, I should allow myself to reproduce it. Democracy, in the proper sense, is unavoidable despoty because it installs the executive, whereby the majority make a decision for one. In this way, all those who are not all, which is a contradiction between the general will and individual freedom. When we say that all are for it and you're against, then the majority does not exist because you are there. But then how come? And John Locke speaks about it, that how difficult it is to obey 100,000 servants. It is a lot more difficult than dealing with 100,000 people who may be even in enmity towards you, who are natural, or else 100,000 people united by the idea that you are wrong. Now, this is, of course, the utmost form of being repressed, to feel oneself being a minority. There is definitely one of the saddest lots of human life, to find himself or herself in a minority that has been arguably proven wrong. And Kant speaks about democracy in the classical times, of course. But there is indeed what totalitarian regimes of the 20th century availed of in propagating their regimes. Finally, Mill. And what does Mill think? Mill says that if we have the simple majority, 56% is the simple majority. You won, right? And what happens next? Then the representatives of this majority also make a decision by simple majority in the representative body, of which 52% may have taken some law. And then where is the majority? Where is it now? Has it been diluted? Has it been eroded? Has it been undermined? So that means that only 1/4 of all have actually taken the decision. If you take into account all those who did not participate in taking the decision, then you would only have about 1/2 of all those who participated in the election. So there is no majority anymore. The majority has evaporated. And this is only, mind you, if you split it in halves. So the majority may eventually turn out to be a minority. Humans err. We're prone to mistakes, but we're also free to change our opinions. And the opinion of a minority, which may seem to be wrong, may well turn out to be right. And this may turn out to be the case in 6 years. Can we say what will happen in 6 years? The horizon of planning in Russia is between 1 year and 18 months. Do we know what kind of majority we will have in Russia in 6 years? I don't think so. So, the minorities cannot be discriminated as much as the majorities can't be discriminated. So the ideal way is a way and a format to represent all minorities as they exist among the population of the particular land or the country. These minorities have to be considered deliberately. This is not just one alternative. This is not one choice or one recipe. In the post-perestroika years, there was this party of madmen who were talking about a national proportional representative. I think that they may well be around. So in the interests of the state stability, it is in the interest of the state to listen to the minorities. This is not. This does not mean that a specific opinion would prevail. I think that this opinion will be changing through dialogue. The representative democracy is not the representation of the majority. It is the representation of all. It is the representation of all groups who are ready to stand up and talk for their rights and interests. Now, this is a quotation from my university professor around 1994. She was a person of very liberal views and a very nice person, but this is what she said. She said that freedom is brotherhood, yes, equality, no. Freedom, yes. Fraternity, yes. Equality, no. Equality, no. I think this has been, in part, a reaction to the so-called dictatorship of the proletariat and the oppressive regime of the Bolsheviks. However, égalité is not to be ruled out from the equation. Hobbes, Locke, Kant, Montesquieu, Mill saw what we have to see, which is that people are different. They're different in their experience, in their physique, in their mind, and the equality that the Age of Reason proclaims has a different meaning. For Aristotle, there is no universalist equality, but there is the concept of equality. Aristotle says that the supreme good is justice, and justice is a form of equality.
Аристотель не говорит о равенстве людей.
Aristotle does not speak about equality of people on the whole, but rather about the equality of people in a specific society, the equality of say, compartments. The Christianity brings in the universalism,
Идею равенства перед Богом,
the idea of equality before God,
которая
which,
при светском взгляде
when we look at it from the secular viewpoint, changes into the equality before nature. We were all born, we shall all die. In the absence of external circumstances, we have equal conditions of freedom which may be compromised.
наконец,
Finally,
если вы спросите меня,
if you ask me,
чей подход к равенству мне ближе из перечисленных
and
авторов,
if you ask me, whose approach would you to equality would I personally salute, then this would be the approach of Hobbes,
пассаж, с которым
because I think that he has a
права.
beautiful
Все люди равны от
passage.
природы. Обычно здесь
All
студент заканчивает чтение.
People are equal by nature. Usually, students stop reading and start to debate. But if we go and continue with this passage, we will see that the difference between people
Можно пренебречь,
could be
когда
ignored
разные люди
if
претендуют на одно и
different
то же.
people are pretending for the same. Let us say all of us wish to drink
Существует наше принципиальное равенство.
from time to time, and this is our principal equality. We all wish to live.
И это
And this is also a matter or a situation of being equal.
вот цитата
This is a quotation
о том, что невероятным это равенство делает возможно лишь
which
пустое
says
самомнение,
that
отсутствие
only
мудрости,
empty
присущее всем людям, полагающим, что они обладают мудростью
consciousness
в большей
of
степени, чем простонародье.
one's
То есть,
wisdom
чем
is
все другие люди,
a compromise,
которые, кроме них самих, и
compromising
многих
such
других,
equality.
которых они одобряют. Вот разве это тусовочное мышление, как бы
So,
сегодня его перевели,
the
не
crowd
свойственно нашей
mentality,
либеральной общественности,
is this not something that we're seeing in our liberal
которая
intelligentsia
с
today?
удовольствием ведется на
The one which is
такие ловушки, как вы,
extremely
креативный класс, а все остальные быдло.
self-conscious. The creative class and the rest are the rebel. Well, this is indeed a terrible way to do it, to look at it. Unless there is a perception of equality, one cannot even pretend to any democratic reform. The equality is indispensable. Empty
Следующий
self-confidence
важный момент
is
противоставление
a
индивидуализма общественного
bane.
блага.
Yet another bane is the opposition of individualism to the public good.
Предполагает то, что большему не
It is
заботимся ни о чем.
implied that the West is
Это
permeated
что-то из «Незнайки на Луне».
by
Была такая
individualism.
советская антиутопия.
You may remember a Soviet time dystopia, the Neznayka or Ignoramus in the Moon. This has done a lot for the post-Soviet men. Now we have capitalism
Никакой справедливости.
and
И
no
что сказать?
justice.
При капитализме не бывает справедливости. Нас же так учили.
We were told that there is no justice. There can be no justice under capitalism. There is no equality. There is no public good, just individual interest.
Но на минуточку, вот смотрите, Джон Милл здесь особенно
But
показательный.
John Mill
Мир,
is particularly
человек, которому мы обязаны более-менее простроенному учению об индивидуальных свободах.
interesting in the sense of his theory of individual freedoms. I think that he was the author who was specifically telling about the individual freedoms. But John Mill, in those very chapters, speaks about the public good as the supreme goal. If we deny the public good, which is, of course, the purpose of the political activity, then why do we need all of our political entrepreneurs? There was a person by the name of Viktor Yanukovych in the post-Soviet space. Interestingly, even those who are against the current Kiev authorities and the current Ukrainian government are not particularly fond of Mr. Yanukovych. But you remember how Mr. Yanukovych ended his political career. He ended his political career by his terribly vulgar dacha, his residence, shown to the world. Mr. Yanukovych was extremely successful in his personal career, but most politicians, and unfortunately many of the current Ukrainian politicians, did not have any perception and did not harbor any perception of the public good. Well, if you want some personal gain, then there are zillions of ways to increase your personal well-being. Your material wealth should not be contingent on your political successes. Such is at least the proper perception of politics. If a person comes into government negating the public good, then even if technologies would bring you some short-term results, you would not be able to make a politician. Mr. Yanukovych is gone for good. And even those who may be willing or are against the current authorities in Kiev but of course they say that he has a good new dacha in the Barvikha region of Moscow. So, indeed, a negation of the public good is probably the most fragrant way and a very blatant political mistake. Whoever takes up a reform path, if he or she denies the public good, such a politician would simply not be in a position to carry out the reform. And in here, we shall see a very different picture. I am not personally interested in considering this any further, but we should understand that any purpose is anarchic in its substance. I have recently attended a PhD dissertation whereby there was a proposal to create a new committee in the Russian government that would be taking in the accounts or the reports for certain reforms. All I could do was to state that why are you not to try and make a competitive democracy with the government responsible before the parliament? Well, that would be a lot cheaper than making yet another committee, and then you will understand really if your reform has been successful. Well, we were told that I was told that the reforms must be continued as they were started, and once you
контролировать результаты вашей деятельности,
deny the society to control the result of your work.
только лишь
And
представитель,
once you give up being a civil servant, then eventually you find yourself in the
24
position
сентября 2011 года, условно.
of the 24th of September of 2011.
Собственно так. Это, кстати, картинка из «Незнайки на Луне».
This is a picture from this Soviet-style dystopia
Антиутопия. Мы переходим к следующему
of
разделу.
Neznайka in the Moon.
Картинка. Она меня в детстве еще поразила.
I liked this as a child. This is a caricature that shows when Neznайka went to the moon and goes through the control and validation. The Soviet dystopia. You can see this. You can see where is the majority and where is the individual.
Здесь все очень четко визуально показано. И вот здесь мы переходим к еще одному мифу.
Here comes another myth. Can we exchange freedom for safety?
Свобода, как известно,
Freedom,
предполагает
as is known,
не только отсутствие ограничений,
provides for absence of restrictions, but it also allows you to dispose of your life, of your property.
Естественный отказ от свободы ведет
When you
автоматически
say no
к тому,
to freedom,
вы теряете контроль над
you
своей
are
жизнью.
not necessarily lose the right to dispose of your life and your property. You don't want to judge others.
Понравился кто-то,
For instance, you dislike someone and you say, it's a bad person.
кто-то ему плохое сделал.
You come to him and say something bad to him. Okay, so you deny yourself this kind of freedom. You give it to the court, to the state, to the judiciary.
Дали ли вы при этом право
Have you
распоряжаться
passed
своей жизнью? Нет.
the right to dispose of your life? No.
Что во имя вашей безопасности
For your own safety,
нужно отказаться от права
you
на собственную
may
жизнь.
say no to your own life, and if you are convinced of that, if you were made convinced of that, you were deceived,
Потому что вы не просто даже душу дьяволу продали.
because it's more than selling your soul to the devil,
Вы ничего не знаете. Дальше все очень
because you don't know anything else what is going to happen to you. It's out of your hand. Today, you think that you are protected, but tomorrow you are mobilized to die for your own safety. That's why the democratic society is so nervous when the freedom is trampled upon. There is a polemics on Apple, on your personal information, the internet, and this is very important for political and public debate nowadays in the United States of America and in the West. The process of securitization started from Black September, which is the 70s, when there came Organization of Liberation of Palestine and Terrorism. And it's growing during all these decades. After a while, we are going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of appearance of modern terrorism. Time flies quickly, but we always losing our freedom, and we cannot use small scissors during the flight because it's dangerous for our safety, and we agree to being monitored by cameras, and our mail may be checked, but what about safety? I think that within the last year we saw the absence of safety, but again measures of safety or security are to be strengthened, meaning to limit our personal freedoms. Today, of course, one of the most important freedoms of movement is questioned in Europe.
Некоторые в России не думают, а почему эти европейцы такие глупые?
Well, some people in Russia say, why Europeans are so foolish? Why don't they want to build a big wall surrounding their borders, and no one out of these 10 people, as was said here, wouldn't go in? But the wall is already there. In my case, to cross it, it took 7 or 10 minutes. Yeah, okay, it was all friendly and formal, but the wall is quite there. It's an institutional wall. It is called the Schengen zone, which operates not only for you and me. And, well, we don't have to run. We can live where we live. This is compatible with physical survival, whether we dislike something there. But this is not the state of war, although some people get the status of refugees. But when it's 20 million who are on the run, no wall would stop them. European intellectuals, in their better part, understand that if you build the wall on the one side, actually it covers two sides. It is for you as well. But Europeans want to travel all over the world, and the whole world should get access to them. Otherwise, it's not possible. And this is a very important moment nowadays. It's a very important crossroads today. I don't know how Europe is going to pass it. But this temptation of a regular exchange of freedom to safety, this is a game without any profit for us.
В данном случае я бы, конечно, хотел поддержать слова Матиаса.
And I would support Matthias Gruden, who said yesterday that democracy is also a problem of safety. It's democracy is an order which saved us from anarchy and from risks of totalitarianism. This is a very important component of democracy, and neither risk is good. Now, Mill discusses the best form of the governance, trying to correlate the notions of progress and order. First, he says that the order is the state of continuous absence of violence, which is important. Locke says that it's important to retain our own property and freedom. Mill says it's very important for development. There is another quote from Gobbs here. He describes this state. I like this quote. In this state, there is no room for normal work because no one is guaranteed to get the fruits of his work. There is no ship convenient buildings, means of transport, which require a lot of effort, no knowledge of the surface of the earth, calculation of time, literature. There is no society, and the worse, there is an eternal fear and danger of violent death. And your life is lonely, short, blunt. That's the description of anarchy, when everybody is against everybody. But there are such criteria in many states. The state is there, but it retains the war, so it locks continuation of this topic. If the state bases itself on lawlessness, not on laws, if the state is against the mutual boon, if the state against justice, and it may be considered a tyranny state.
Следовательно, речь идет не просто о
then it's
государстве,
not
а не
just the state, but this is a certain form of governance
превыше желательно представительство всех групп.
which requires the representation of all the interesting groups of the society.
Поэтому порядок, конечно, необходим.
Therefore, the order is necessary. Democracy and freedom, politically speaking,
Никоим образом не могут этого отрицать.
cannot deny that.
И когда Россия, ей-богу, выбирает вот это вот
And when
состояние
Russia
своей пресловутой цикличности,
chooses
между
this cyclic
торжеством
phenomena
государства, смута — это не демократия,
between the
это война всех против всех,
right of the state and chaos,
которая почему-то в нашу
or celebration of the state and chaos, well, this is not a democracy.
Ну и последнее.
Now, finally,
Не все, конечно, народы готовы к демократии.
not all people are ready for democracy. There are 4 quotes here. I'm not going to read them on word for word, because you'll get this presentation and you may receive it. Mill says that not everybody is ready for democracy, and this is obvious. It's not to argue, but look at the reasons of unpreparedness for democracy. The first, inability to stand for your own freedom, passivity,
Либо хуже того,
or even worse, the last quote.
там можно найти, конечно, и больше, но
You may find there more,
более яркие.
but these are the brightest ones.
Вот это странная вещь.
So that's the strange thing, and I will quote it. And there are nations
Выливать другими настолько преобладает
who want to dominate above others,
зависимость, что они даже ради
and for this kind of power, they are ready to sacrifice their own freedoms. An average person
лучше надеяться,
in such people
что он достигнет власти
prefers to hope to have authority over his own citizens, become a lieutenant or a captain, than to be sure that the authority wouldn't interfere with his own life and his relatives or his close ones.
ему не вмешательство государства, когда он сам готов к
He himself is ready to check up on everybody else.
Недавно пришлось быть на
Quite recently, I was at a public council at in Moscow. There was a public council, and a representative of Azerbaijani diaspora, a military person, who was offended the way the state dealt with his mother, who was a war veteran. He said, "You are a nation of guards." Yes, and everybody took it, and everybody said, "Thank you, and you were also right." Because we work to make life better. Yeah, well, someone may be offended because it touches upon your national feelings, but you have to think about it.
Собственно, здесь стоило бы поставить многоточие, потому что мы понимаем, что
Well, this is not the full stop here,
демократии
because the appearance of democracy and its development is a very complicated process.
я лишь немного усложнил то,
And
что
I
представлено в качестве стереотипных тезисов изначально.
complicated initial stereotypes a little bit. On each item we may talk more and more,
Конечно, можем оправдывать то, что
and we may justify the impossibility of all this. But one question remains. Christopher Coker was skeptical towards internet technologies yesterday. In one item, I am also skeptical about it, because as distinct from computer games, we do not have another life,
и мы не сможем ее получить.
and we shall not be able to get it.
Этот вопрос я оставляю вам.
And this is the issue for your rumination.
Возможно, нашу жизнь
Possibly our life in Russia would go without democracy. I think it's possible.
Есть ли у нас еще одна?
But do we have another life?
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much.